As Officer Ryan Carter raced through the pouring rain that night, he had no idea a 3-year-old's call would change lives forever. What would you have done in his place? Let us know where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss tomorrow's special story. Trust me, it's one that will stay with you long after the video ends. See you then. A 3-year-old's 911 call, what the officer found will shock you. The rain pounded relentlessly against the windshield of Officer Ryan Carter's patrol car, blurring his vision as he navigated the dark streets of Cedar Creek. It was late October, and the chill of the season crept through the cracks, settling deep into his bones despite the heater blasting inside the car. After nearly 20 years on the force, Ryan had come to appreciate the quiet of late-night patrols, the predictable rhythm of a small town winding down. He was ready to end his shift, grab a hot meal, and sink into the comfort of his recliner. But fate had other plans. The sudden crackle of the radio interrupted the hum of the engine. Possible domestic disturbance at 2 and 14 Oak Street. Caller is a 3-year-old male. The dispatcher's voice carried an unusual edge, a mix of disbelief and concern. Ryan frowned, gripping the wheel tighter. A toddler calling 911? It had to be a mistake. Maybe a kid playing with the phone or an accidental dial. But something about the way the dispatcher said it made his instincts kick in. You never ignore a call, especially when a child is on the line. Flipping on his siren, he accelerated, the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the rain-soaked pavement. Oak Street was a quiet residential area, lined with modest homes and scattered Halloween decorations swaying in the wind. As he pulled up to 214, a small white house with a sagging front porch, he noticed an overturned tricycle lying in the walkway, its wheels still spinning. A tight knot formed in his stomach. Stepping out, the cold rain soaked through his uniform, but he barely noticed. He approached the front door and knocked firmly. "Police! Open up!" Silence. Then a small, hesitant voice whispered from the other side. "Who is it?" Ryan knelt slightly, his voice calm but firm. "It's Officer Carter from the police department. Can you open the door for me?" A soft click. The door creaked open just a few inches, revealing a tiny face with wide, tear-filled blue eyes. The boy, no older than 3, clutched a worn teddy bear, his blonde hair damp and matted to his forehead. His lower lip trembled as he whispered, "No, but Grandpa fell down, and he won't wake up." Ryan's pulse quickened as he pushed the door open, stepping into the dimly lit living room. The air was thick with the scent of damp wool, old furniture, and something else, something metallic. His eyes scanned the space in an instant, his training kicking in. There, sprawled across the floor, was an elderly man, motionless, his head resting against the edge of the worn-out coffee table. A dark crimson stain spread slowly across the carpet beneath him. Ryan immediately dropped to one knee, reaching for the man's wrist. The skin was clammy, his pulse weak and thready. "Sir? Can you hear me?" No response. His breath was shallow, labored, each rise and fall of his chest barely visible under the dim glow of the table lamp. Behind him, the little boy clutched his teddy bear even tighter, his small frame shaking. "Is Grandpa gonna wake up?" His voice was barely above a whisper, filled with fear and uncertainty. Ryan forced a reassuring smile, even as his gut churned with unease. "We're going to take care of him, buddy. You did the right thing calling for help." With one hand still on the man's wrist, he grabbed his radio and pressed the button. "Dispatch, this is Officer Carter. I have an unconscious male at 2114 Oak Street. Head injury with possible blood loss. Send medical assistance immediately." "Copy that, Officer Carter. Ambulance en route," the dispatcher confirmed. Ryan turned his attention back to the boy, who hadn't moved from his spot near the door. His little fingers dug into the fabric of his bear, his breath coming in short, uneven gasps. Ryan could see the panic in his wide blue eyes. He softened his tone. "What's your name, kiddo?" "Ethan," the boy stammered, his voice trembling. "Okay, Ethan, can you tell me what happened?" Ryan asked, keeping his voice calm, steady. The boy sniffled, his lower lip quivering. I was playing with my cars, and Grandpa said he didn't feel good. He got up, but then he fell, and he hit his head." He pointed a small, shaky finger at the coffee table. "I tried to wake him up, but he wouldn't move." Ryan nodded, his mind piecing together the situation. The old man must have suffered a medical episode, maybe a stroke or a heart attack, that caused him to collapse and hit his head. The bleeding could be dangerous, but the bigger concern was why he went down in the first place. The sound of sirens in the distance made Ethan jump, his eyes darting toward the door. Are they going to help him? Ryan placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. They're going to do everything they can, I promise. The ambulance's flashing lights lit up the living room as paramedics rushed in. Ryan quickly briefed them on what he knew, stepping aside as they assessed the elderly man. Ethan hovered nervously at the edge of the room, watching every move they made. Ryan could tell the boy was terrified, and it broke something inside him. This kid had been all alone, trying to help his grandfather, not knowing what to do. And yet somehow, he had remembered the one thing that mattered most: calling for help. As the paramedics worked, Ryan crouched down beside Ethan. Hey, you know what? You were really brave tonight. Not a lot of kids your age would know what to do, but you did. Ethan sniffed, wiping his nose with his pajama sleeve. Mommy said if something bad happens, I should call 911 and tell them our address. Ryan smiled, genuinely impressed. She taught you well, and you listened. That makes you a hero, kid? For the first time since Ryan arrived, Ethan's expression shifted, just slightly. Pride flickered through the fear in his little eyes. But the moment was fleeting, overshadowed by the weight of the unknown. The paramedics carefully lifted Ethan's grandfather onto a stretcher, one of them turning to Ryan. His pulse is weak, but he's still with us. We need to get him to the hospital, fast. Ethan clutched Ryan's sleeve. Can I go with Grandpa? Ryan hesitated. Normally, a child this young wouldn't be allowed in the ambulance, but the thought of Ethan being left alone in this house, scared and confused, didn't sit right with him. I'll follow right behind you, Ryan told him. I won't leave you alone. Ethan bit his lip, but finally nodded, his tiny hand slipping from Ryan's arm. As the ambulance doors shut and the sirens wailed, Ryan stepped outside, his mind racing. This was more than just a routine call. This was a kid who had no one else tonight. And for some reason, Ryan wasn't ready to walk away just yet. Ryan watched as the ambulance pulled away, its red and white lights flashing against the rain-slicked pavement. He stood there for a moment, the cold air biting through his damp uniform, his mind racing. The little boy, Ethan, had done everything right. He had called for help, remembered his address, and stayed with his grandfather. But now, as Ryan looked back at the quiet, empty house, a new worry settled in his gut. What happens next? Shaking off the thought, he climbed back into his patrol car and headed towards Cedar Creek General Hospital. He had promised Ethan he wouldn't leave him alone, and he wasn't about to break that promise. When he arrived, he found the boy sitting in a stiff plastic chair in the waiting area, his small hands gripping his teddy bear so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. A nurse knelt beside him, speaking in soft, reassuring tones, but Ethan's eyes remained locked on the hallway where they had taken his grandfather. Ryan approached, kneeling down beside him. Hey, buddy, how's Grandpa doing? Ethan looked up at him, his face pale and streaked with dried tears. They said he's still sleeping, he whispered. They won't let me see him yet. Ryan glanced at the nurse, who gave him a sympathetic look. They're doing everything they can, she assured them, but we need to get in touch with his parents. Ryan turned back to Ethan. Do you know how to call your mom or dad? The boy nodded and fumbled with the oversized sleeve of his pajama shirt, pulling out a wrinkled piece of paper. Ryan unfolded it and saw 2 phone numbers labeled Mom and Dad. He stood up and dialed the first one, pressing the phone to his ear. It rang 4 times before a groggy voice answered. Hello? Mrs. Walker? Ryan said, keeping his voice steady. This is Officer Ryan Carter with the Cedar Creek Police Department. I'm with your son, Ethan. There was a pause, followed by the sound of rustling sheets. Ethan, what's going on? Ryan exhaled, choosing his words carefully. Your father, George Walker, had a medical emergency tonight. Ethan called 911, and paramedics took him to Cedar Creek General Hospital. He's stable, but we need you to come as soon as possible. The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds before she spoke again, her voice suddenly sharp and alert. Oh my God. We're out of state for work. My husband and I are in Chicago. We weren't supposed to be back until next week. Ryan glanced down at Ethan, who was still curled up in the chair, his small shoulders tense. Your son is safe, but he's scared. He needs you. We'll be on the first flight back, she said, her voice breaking. Can you stay with him until we get there? Ryan didn't hesitate. Of course. After ending the call, he sat down next to Ethan, who looked up at him with wide, hopeful eyes. Is my mom coming? Ryan nodded. Yeah, kiddo, she and your dad are on their way. Ethan let out a small breath of relief but didn't say anything else. Instead, he leaned his head against Ryan's arm, gripping his teddy bear tighter. As the minutes passed, Ryan found himself thinking about the situation more deeply. Ethan had been left in his grandfather's care while his parents traveled for work, something plenty of families did. But George Walker was in failing health. He had suffered a serious medical event tonight, and Ryan couldn't shake the thought that it could have been much worse if Ethan hadn't known how to call for help. A troubling thought entered his mind. Was this arrangement safe for Ethan? His gut told him no. His grandfather clearly loved him, but could an elderly man struggling with health issues really care for a 3-year-old full-time? And what if something worse happened? What if there was no one there next time? Ryan sighed, rubbing a hand over his jaw. This wasn't just a simple case of a medical emergency. This was a family in crisis, and he wasn't sure if walking away when Ethan's parents arrived was the right thing to do. He had been a cop for nearly 20 years, but tonight, something felt different. This wasn't just another call. This was a little boy who needed someone to look out for him. And for some reason, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, that person was supposed to be him. Ryan sat in the hospital waiting room, his eyes fixed on the clock above the reception desk. It had been over an hour since he called Ethan's parents, and the boy had finally dozed off, curled up in the chair beside him, his head resting against Ryan's arm. The soft rise and fall of his little chest were the only signs of peace in an otherwise tense night. Ryan exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. This was the part of the job that didn't come with a rule book. He had responded to the call, ensured Ethan was safe, and contacted his parents. Technically, his job was done. But something about this situation didn't sit right. The kid had been left in the care of an elderly man who was clearly struggling with his health. What if tonight had gone differently? What if Ethan hadn't known what to do? His thoughts were interrupted when a nurse approached. Officer Carter? He sat up, careful not to wake Ethan. Yeah? Mr. Walker is awake. He's asking about his grandson. Ryan nodded, glancing down at Ethan's sleeping form. I'll talk to him first. Let the kid rest. As he entered the hospital room, he found George Walker propped up in bed, looking frail and exhausted. His face was pale, his breathing slow, but his eyes still held awareness. Officer, he rasped. Where's Ethan? Ryan pulled a chair closer. He's okay. He's sleeping in the waiting room. The old man let out a weak breath of relief. Thank God. I was so scared. I tried to get up, but everything went dark. He swallowed hard, looking away. I failed him. Ryan shook his head. No, sir, you didn't fail him. But we do need to talk about his situation. George sighed, as if he had been expecting this conversation. His parents, they love him, you know. They're just always working, always gone. I didn't want them to worry, so I told them I could handle it. He paused, his voice thick with guilt. But maybe I was wrong. Ryan leaned forward. I'm not saying you don't love that kid. I can see you do. But taking care of a 3-year-old full-time is a lot for anyone, especially when your health isn't great. He hesitated before asking, has something like this happened before? George was silent for a long moment, then finally nodded. A few weeks ago, I got dizzy in the kitchen, fell against the counter. Ethan cried, but I told him I was fine. Didn't want him to be scared. Ryan clenched his jaw. This wasn't a one-time event. It was a pattern. And it was dangerous. Before he could say anything else, the door swung open, and Ethan's parents rushed in, their faces etched with panic. Jessica Walker immediately went to her father's bedside while Mark scooped Ethan up from the chair, holding him tightly as he stirred awake. The room filled with overlapping voices, relief, apologies, guilt. Ryan stepped back, watching the scene unfold. He saw the love, the worry. But he also saw something else. This wasn't just a bad night. This was a wake-up call. As the Walkers reassured Ethan and spoke to the doctors, Ryan quietly left the room. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number for Child Protective Services. His gut told him this wasn't about punishment. It was about making sure Ethan was safe. Taking a deep breath, he made the call. Ryan sat in his patrol car outside the hospital, the engine humming softly beneath him. The call to Child Protective Services had been made. Now, all he could do was wait and hope he had done the right thing. He knew this wasn't about tearing a family apart. It was about making sure Ethan was safe. Still, he couldn't shake the unease in his chest. He had seen too many cases where good intentions led to unintended consequences. Had he just made things worse? The next afternoon, Ryan got a call from Emily Carter, the CPS worker assigned to the case. Officer Carter, I just left the hospital, she said. I spoke with Ethan's parents and his grandfather. We're not removing him from the home, but we are putting a support plan in place. Ryan exhaled, tension easing slightly. What kind of plan? Mr. Walker will be receiving in-home care to help with his medical needs, she explained. What? And we're working with Ethan's parents to find childcare options for when they travel. They're willing to make changes. They were just so focused on providing for him financially that they didn't realize how much he needed them emotionally. Ryan nodded, leaning back in his seat. That was something he understood all too well. People always thought providing meant money, stability. But kids needed more than that. They needed presence, love, someone to rely on. A few days later, Ryan found himself back at 214 Oak Street. He wasn't sure why he had come. Maybe it was unfinished business, maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was just that he couldn't get the kid out of his head. When he knocked, it was George Walker who answered, looking steadier than the last time Ryan had seen him. Officer Carter, he said with a small smile. Come on in. Ryan stepped inside, his eyes immediately finding Ethan, who was sitting on the living room floor, arranging tiny plastic dinosaurs into an elaborate battle scene. When he saw Ryan, his face lit up. You came back, Ethan said, jumping up and running to him. Ryan crouched down. Told you I wouldn't forget about you, didn't I? Ethan beamed, grabbing his hand. Want to play dinosaurs? Ryan chuckled. Yeah, kid, I'd love to. As he sat down on the floor, helping Ethan organize his tiny army, he realized something. This wasn't just about duty anymore. Somewhere along the way, this had become personal. Maybe he had come to help Ethan, but maybe, just maybe, Ethan had helped him too. Life can change in an instant, sometimes in ways we never expect. A simple call from a 3-year-old turned into a life-altering moment, not just for his grandfather, but for Officer Ryan Carter as well. What would you have done in his place? Have you ever witnessed or experienced a moment where quick thinking made all the difference? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear where you're watching from and what you think about tonight's story. Do you believe Ryan made the right choice by calling CPS? Should he have handled it differently? What would you do if you were in his shoes? Your insights and opinions are what make this community special, so don't be shy. Let's discuss it below. And if you love compelling real-life stories like this, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. We have another gripping story coming tomorrow, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and we can't wait to read your comments.